Every town in the West has its secrets, but the secret in Harmony Gulch had a shape. They say it walked like a ghost. Folks whispered about it in the saloon and behind closed doors. They spoke of a shadow that slipped through the night, a shorn head that held no reflection from the moon, and the hollow eyes of someone who was already dead, but had forgotten how to fall. They called it a bad omen. A curse brought down upon the town for sins no one dared to speak aloud. Malachi Thorne didn't ride into Harmony Gulch hunting for ghosts. He was just a weary drifter, looking for a place to rest his head. And that's where Malachi Thorne found her. She wasn't so much hiding as she was trying to shrink herself out of existence. Curled up behind a stack of rotting crates, where the air was thick with the smell of spilled whiskey and neglect. She was a creature made of bone and terror, a young Asian girl who'd been stripped of all the things that make a person whole. Her head was shorn bare. Someone had taken a dull blade to her hair, leaving a pale scalp dotted with tiny, angry nicks. Her feet were a ruin of dried blood and raw skin, etched with the memory of a desperate flight over sharp rock. And when Malachi looked closer, she was scavenging in an old pig trough, searching for anything to quiet the hunger that was eating her from the inside out. That sight stopped a man like Malachi, a man who'd seen enough of the world's misery to grow calluses on his soul. This wasn't poverty. This was cruelty, by design. The girl couldn't have been more than 17. The rags on her body were a testament to her struggle, the stains telling a story no decent person would want to hear. Malachi moved closer, slow, his boots soft on the hard-packed earth. The way you'd approach a spooked filly. His voice was low and gentle. Easy now. Her head snapped up. Her eyes flew open, black as a pair of dry wells, holding nothing but stark terror. She scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the roughwood wall, her whole body a tremor. He could see the bruises now. Purple and yellow shadows blooming on her jaw and temple. Fresh cuts crisscrossed her arms. The way she guarded her left side told him someone had hurt her badly. But it was her eyes that got to him. Hollowed out. No fight left in them, no hope. Just the blank stare of someone who'd given up, who'd learned that kindness was just the preamble to the cruelty that always followed. He crouched down slowly, making himself smaller. "I'm not gonna hurt you." He pulled a strip of jerky from his coat pocket and held it out. The girl stared at the food, then back at his face. Her eyes searched him, looking for the trick, the trap. When her hand finally reached for it, it trembled so violently she could barely grasp it. She tore into it with a desperation that clawed at something deep inside him. He'd seen hungry people. This was starvation. He whispered, "Who did this to you?" She just stared, blankly. Behind them, the crunch of approaching boots. Malachi turned. Deputy Finch was rounding the corner, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol, a casual gesture for men who mistake their authority for righteousness. Finch's face hardened into a mask of contempt when he saw the girl. His voice was cold and dismissive. "Well now. Looks like you found our little stray." Malachi rose slowly, deliberately placing himself between the deputy and the girl. "She's hurt. She needs a doctor, not a jail cell." Finch let out a laugh, but it had no humor in it. Just the cold sound of metal striking stone. "A doctor? Stranger, you don't know what you're dealing with. She owes a debt to Mr. Blackwood. A considerable one, for his generosity in taking her in. She's got work to do to pay it off." The way Finch said work made Malachi's skin crawl. He knew that kind of work. And he knew that kind of debt. It wasn't meant to be paid. It was meant to be a chain. The deputy took a step closer, his eyes like chips of flint. "Now, step aside. Mr. Blackwood is not a patient man. And in Harmony Gulch, nobody wants to test Mr. Blackwood's patience." The threat hung in the dead, hot air between them. The girl trembled behind Malachi's back, and he knew that whatever nightmare she had just escaped, it wasn't over. It had just found her again. Malachi held the deputy's gaze for a long moment. The air was still, thick with unspoken violence. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his back on the man with the badge. He gave a gentle nod to the girl, a silent promise, and began to guide her out of the alley's shadows and into the unforgiving light of the main street. Behind them, Deputy Finch let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief, but he didn't follow. For now, the threat was enough. As they emerged, the town seemed to hold its breath. Conversations on wooden porches died mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer, their faces hardening into masks of suspicion. Men, leaning against posts, shifted their weight, their hands instinctively moving closer to the iron they carried on their hips. The girl pressed closer to Malachi's side, trying to make herself smaller, to disappear into his shadow. Whispers followed them like flies. That's her. The one they say is diseased. Brought nothing but trouble. Malachi kept his jaw set, his eyes fixed forward. He could feel the town's judgment like a physical weight. These people had already tried and convicted her in their minds. She was a burden, a threat, something to be cast out. And by standing with her, he had just made himself guilty by association. They reached the doctor's office, a small building with the words Dr. Henley, physician painted on the window, the letters peeling from the sun. Inside, a thin man with tired, kind eyes looked up from his desk. But when he saw the girl, that kindness evaporated, replaced by a deep, weary caution. Before Malachi could even speak, the doctor shook his head. I can't help you. Malachi gestured to the girl's infected feet, the red streaks creeping up her ankles. Look at her. Those wounds could kill her if they're not cleaned. The doctor's gaze flickered with a genuine regret, but his voice was firm. Mr. Blackwood's orders are clear. Any assistance for her goes on his account. And he's made it known that her account is closed. She's a child. This is your duty. The doctor's shoulders slumped. My duty is also to keep this practice open for the folks who can pay. I cross Mr. Blackwood, and I lose everything. My hands are tied. They stepped back out into the oppressive heat, the door closing behind them with a soft, final click. The girl stumbled, her strength fading with her hope. Time was a current, and it was pulling her under. Then, a voice cut through the street's hostile silence. You there? Stranger. Malachi turned. A woman in her 50s was approaching, her dress practical but well made. She had the look of someone who had weathered many storms and refused to be broken by them. Her eyes, unlike the others in this town, held a clear, steady light of concern. I'm Adelaide Croft, she said, her voice low but strong. I run the boarding house. I saw what happened with Finch. She looked at the girl, her expression softening with a pity that held no judgment. That child needs a safe place. I'm trying to find one, Malachi said carefully, unsure who to trust. Adelaide's gaze hardened. You won't find it out here. This town answers to one man. But some of us still remember what decency looks like. She guided them off the main street, into the quiet shade behind her boarding house, away from prying eyes. The girl followed, her steps slow and pained. Once they were alone, Adelaide spoke, her words dropping like stones into a deep well. Mr. Blackwood didn't rescue that girl, stranger. She paused, letting the weight of it settle. He bought her. The story tumbled out in hushed, angry tones. A wagon train of Chinese laborers, passing through weeks ago. A broken axle just outside of town. And in the back of one of those wagons, this girl. Not as a passenger. But as cargo. She was in chains, Adelaide said, her voice barely a whisper. Ankle irons. They said she was indentured, working off a family debt. But I've seen the world. I know slavery when I see it. Mr. Blackwood had offered to take her off their hands. A business transaction. He said he needed help at his saloon. But this child. She had a fire in her. She fought back. Adelaide gently touched the girl's shorn head. That's his brand. For the ones who fight. He locked her up, starved her, tried to break her spirit. 3 nights ago, there was a fire started in one of his back rooms. In the chaos, she got away. Adelaide's eyes met Malachi's, and in them he saw the terrible clarity of the situation. He's not hunting a debtor, stranger. He's hunting his property. A cold dread settled in Malachi's gut. Before he could process Adelaide's words, the girl let out a sharp gasp. Her fingers dug into his arm, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror, fixed on something over his shoulder. Malachi turned. Two men were walking toward them, their steps deliberate and full of purpose. One was tall and scarred, a man built for violence. The other was shorter, stocky, dressed in clothes far too expensive for a dusty town like this. His face was a cold, impassive mask, but his eyes were like chips of black ice. Mr. Blackwood had arrived. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over them, dismissing Malachi and Adelaide, and landing on the girl as if she were a misplaced piece of furniture. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth, with a faint, unplaceable accent. "Adelaide. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Adelaide Croft stepped forward, placing herself between him and the girl. "She belongs to no one, Blackwood. She's a human being." A smile touched Blackwood's lips, but it held no warmth. "She is an indentured servant with a legal contract. I have papers." He patted his fine coat pocket. "It was very expensive to transport her, to feed and house her. She has a debt to repay." Malachi found his voice, keeping it steady and low. "What kind of work is she repaying it with?" Blackwood's gaze slid to him, sizing him up. "Whatever work I require. Cleaning. Serving my customers. Simple things." The lie hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, a small voice, fragile as a dry leaf, broke the tension. "Please." Everyone turned to the girl. It was the first word she had spoken. Her English was broken, but the desperation in it was universal. "Please. No, go back." Blackwood's face darkened. "You see? She understands perfectly. She chose to run away. She chose to steal from my hospitality. Now, she must face the consequences." Malachi knelt slightly, speaking to the girl gently. "What's your name?" She glanced nervously at Blackwood, then whispered, "May." "May," Malachi repeated, and the simple act of naming her seemed to give her a flicker of strength. The scarred man beside Blackwood shifted, his hand moving closer to his gun. "Boss, just give the word." But Malachi spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension, directed at Blackwood. "The problem with your business model is that it's illegal." Blackwood laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I have a contract. The law is on my side." "I'm not talking about town law," Malachi said, his voice dropping, each word landing with quiet force. "I'm talking about federal law." He straightened up, and though he held no weapon, his presence seemed to fill the space. "For 3 years, I was a U.S. Marshal. My job was tracking operations just like yours along the rail lines. Missing persons, families looking for children who vanished. The authorities would be very interested in your papers, Mr. Blackwood. Very interested indeed." The color drained from Blackwood's face, replaced by a flush of pure rage. The scarred man froze, his hand hovering over his gun. The game had just changed. "You have no proof," Blackwood hissed. "Don't I?" Malachi said grimly. Blackwood stared, his mind racing, calculating. A dead marshal would bring an avalanche of trouble that not even his money could stop. He finally took a step back, his eyes burning with hate. "This is not over," he snarled, before turning and retreating into the street, his enforcer following close behind. Adelaide let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A marshal. That explains it. But Malachi was looking at May, who was staring at him with something like awe. He asked her quietly, "The fire at Blackwood's place. Tell me what happened." May's face clouded with the memory. She struggled with the English, her voice halting. I start fire," Adelaide gasped. "He hurt other girl. Younger," May continued, tears welling in her eyes. "I try stop him. He locked me up. So, I burn." "You burned what?" Malachi pressed gently. Her next words chilled them to the bone. "Papers. His books. Names. Many names. Girls. Boys. Where from? Where go? Money papers. Malachi and Adelaide looked at each other, the terrible truth dawning on them. She hadn't just escaped. She had tried to destroy his entire operation from the inside. That's why he was so desperate. It wasn't about one girl. It was about the records of his sins, and the one person who knew what they contained. Just then, a commotion erupted from the main street. Angry voices, growing closer. A crowd was gathering, and at its head was the familiar, swaggering figure of Deputy Finch. His voice boomed across the dusty air. "Thorne. Come on out. You're harboring a fugitive and an arsonist. You've got some explaining to do." The brief victory had vanished. The town itself was coming for them. Adelaide Croft peered through the curtains, her face grim. "There's a dozen men out there, at least. Blackwood's been spreading poison. Telling folks you're a dangerous man, protecting a thief." Through the window, Malachi could see it. A sea of angry faces, lit by the flickering orange of torchlight. The faces of ordinary men, their fear and suspicion twisted into a righteous mob by Blackwood's whispers. Deputy Finch's voice boomed again, closer this time. "Last warning, Thorne. Open this door, or we're coming through it." May pressed herself against the wall, the small amount of hope she'd found just moments before evaporating like mist. She whispered, her voice choked with a terrible resolve. "I go to them. Save you trouble. I. Already dead inside." Malachi's voice was fierce, a low growl of defiance. "No. Nobody else dies on my watch. Not anymore." The words had barely left his mouth when the front door exploded inward, a shower of splinters and shattered wood. Deputy Finch stood in the breach, his pistol drawn, flanked by 6 of Blackwood's hired guns. "Hands up, all of you," he snarled. But as Finch's eyes adjusted to the lamplight, he found himself staring down the dark, unblinking barrel of Malachi's revolver. "I've got a better idea, Deputy," Malachi said, his voice dangerously calm. "How about you and your friends back out of here, nice and slow?" Finch's hand tightened on his weapon. "You're outnumbered 6-1, Thorne. Don't be a fool." A new voice, steady and clear, came from the street behind him. 7-1, Deputy. But who's counting?" Finch spun around. Standing in the street, bathed in the torchlight, was Dr. Henley. But he wasn't holding a medical bag. He was holding a double-barreled shotgun. And behind him stood the blacksmith, the telegraph operator, and 3 other townsmen Malachi recognized. All of them were armed. None of them looked like they were there to help the deputy. "What in the hell is this?" Finch stammered, his authority crumbling. "It's called a reckoning, Finch," Dr. Henley said calmly. "We've been watching Blackwood's poison spread for months. When Adelaide told us about a former marshal making a stand, we decided it was time to finally choose a side." Finch's face went pale. "You're all making a mistake. He has legal papers. He has nothing but lies," the blacksmith boomed. "We sent a telegram to the territorial capital this afternoon, Doctor. Seems the federal marshals are already investigating human trafficking along the railroad. They're very interested in meeting Mr. Blackwood." Just then, Blackwood himself pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "Enough," he shouted. "This girl is my property. I have a contract." "You have a piece of paper that says you can own a child," Malachi said, his gun never wavering from Finch. "Last I checked, we fought a war to settle that question. This is different. Her family owed a debt." Blackwood protested. Dr. Henley's voice cut through the night, heavy with a terrible sadness. "Her family never saw a cent of your money, Blackwood. We've been asking questions, sending telegrams of our own. May's family was murdered by bandits on the trail 2 months ago." He paused, his eyes locking on Blackwood. "You bought her from the men who killed them." The words struck May like a physical blow. A sound of pure, unadulterated grief tore from her throat, and she collapsed to her knees, sobbing for a family she now knew was gone forever. Adelaide knelt and wrapped her arms around the weeping girl. Blackwood's mask of civility finally shattered, revealing the monster beneath. So what? She was dead to the world. I gave her a purpose. You gave her a cage, Malachi said, his voice deadly quiet. It was then that Finch made his move, swinging his pistol toward Malachi. But the former marshal was faster. A single shot echoed through the night. Finch's gun flew from a hand shattered by Malachi's bullet. Blackwood's men reached for their own weapons, but froze as they found themselves facing the determined muzzles of 7 townsmen who had finally decided to take their home back. It was over. Dr. Henley looked at Blackwood, his face grim. The marshals will be here by morning. Your business in this town is finished. Blackwood stared around at the wreckage of his empire, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He spat on the ground. You think this changes anything? There are 100 more like me. You save one girl, but you change nothing. Malachi looked from Blackwood's hateful face to the sobbing girl being comforted on the floor. We changed everything for her, he said. Sometimes, that's enough to start. The federal marshals arrived 2 days later, as promised. They were quiet, professional men who listened intently to May's story, their faces grim. Blackwood and his men, including a bandaged and sullen Deputy Finch, were taken away in irons, destined for a federal court and a long time in the dark. The reign of fear over Harmony Gulch was broken. A quiet settled over the town, the kind that follows a fever breaking. In the days that followed, Malachi watched as May began to piece herself back together. Dr. Henley had treated her feet, and with proper food and Adelaide's care, the hollows in her cheeks began to fill. She wore a simple dress that Adelaide had altered for her, and she ran her hand often over the soft, dark stubble that was beginning to cover her scalp, a quiet miracle of new growth. The marshals were set to leave at the end of the week. The lead marshal, a man named Elias Vance who knew of Malachi from his former life, found him on the porch of Adelaide's boarding house. The territorial governor sends his thanks, Vance said. The information from Blackwood's ledgers, the ones he tried to recreate, has helped us unravel a network stretching across 3 territories. May's testimony will be crucial to bringing it all down. He paused, then looked Malachi square in the eye. There's a place for you with us, Thorne. A badge, if you want it. There's a lot of evil in this world. We could use a man like you to help fight it. The offer hung in the air, a path back to a life Malachi understood. A life of long trails, cold campfires, and the righteous hunt. A life of running. Later that day, he found May in Adelaide's small vegetable garden. She was on her knees, carefully tending to a row of young sprouts, her touch gentle and focused. She seemed to have a natural instinct for coaxing life from the dry soil. He saw how her hands, once bruised and bloodied, were now creators of a different kind. He stood there for a moment, just watching her. She looked up, as if sensing his presence, and gave him a small, shy smile. The marshals, he said, his voice quiet. They want me to ride with them when they leave. May looked down at the small green plant in her hands, considering his words. Her English was better now, growing each day like the garden around her. It is important work, she said softly. To chase bad men. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady, holding a wisdom far beyond her years. Mrs. Adelaide. She say I can stay. Work for her. For real money. She say maybe I can buy small piece of this land one day. She gestured to the earth around them. Make things grow. She held his gaze. Chasing bad men is tearing down what is wrong, she said, her voice finding a new strength. But planting a garden is building what is right. Malachi stood silent, the weight of her simple truth settling over him. For years, he had been driven by ghosts, by the anger and guilt of a past he couldn't outrun. His purpose had been defined by the evil he pursued. He had never stopped to consider what it might feel like to build something instead. To have a purpose defined not by the chase, but by the roots you put down. He looked past the garden, at the boarding house, at the town that was slowly learning to breathe again. For the first time in a long time, He wasn't thinking about the trail ahead. He was thinking about what it might mean to stay. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, and Harmony Gulch turned with them. Malachi Thorne stood in the alley behind the general store. The same spot where he had first found her. But the shadows were gone. The filth and neglect had been replaced by rows of thriving vegetables, their green leaves reaching for the sun. The space was no longer an ending, but a beginning. He touched the star pinned to his chest. It was new, polished silver, bearing the title of sheriff. A badge given to him not by a distant government, but by the people of this town. A responsibility he no longer ran from. A woman's voice, clear and full of life, called out from the garden. "Sheriff. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Adelaide says to bring your appetite." He looked over to see May. Her hair had grown back, a thick, black braid that rested on her shoulder. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a bright, steady confidence. She was showing another young woman, a new arrival rescued from a situation much like her own, how to properly stake a tomato plant. She was laughing, a sound as rich and alive as the soil she tended. As Malachi walked toward the boarding house, the sounds of his new life settled around him. The murmur of conversation from the porch, the smell of roasting chicken from Adelaide's kitchen, the echo of May's laughter. This was different from his old life. Quieter. More meaningful. He wasn't just chasing problems anymore. He was protecting a solution. Blackwood had been right about one thing. The world was full of men like him. But it was also full of people like Adelaide Croft, and Dr. Henley, and the townsfolk who had stood up when it mattered most. It was full of people like May, who could turn their pain into a garden. The girl with no name, no hair, and no shoes was gone. In her place stood a citizen, a business owner, a teacher. And in saving her, Malachi Thorne, the man who had no home, had finally found his.